Hello and welcome to this new edition of the Paranormal Concept Show. I'm your host Paul Rook, and tonight, as always, we're joined by both co-hosts Kerry Greenaway and Richard Clements. Hello, guys.
Hello, how are you?
Hello.
Yeah, not too bad. How are you?
Well, quiet, relaxed. I mean, been like this for about 3 weeks now, but I think we can say that about all of us, really.
Yeah, Kerry, how are you?
Yep.
It's the-
I don't quite know what to say because in some ways you've got all the time. You've got time, haven't you? You've got all the time in the world,
Yeah,
and I'm achieving nothing.
Yes, pretty much the same here. The lethargicness has sort of kicked in. It's not
Yeah.
sort of bad, but you just sort of feel a bit, I can't be bothered to do anything.
Yeah. And I'm hearing of other people like doing loads and loads of stuff. And I do bits, don't get me wrong, but then I'm like, can't be bothered. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's a very strange thing, and I can't quite work out because I do like to do quite a lot of self-examination. And is it because I'm just being lazy?
Yeah,
very
that's it, totally.
and doubt that. I mean, sort of what you see on social media is probably not what people are actually doing. I mean, there's a sort of like there is a persona for social media, isn't there? Sort of, especially if you look at people's Facebook feeds and stuff like that. You think, really? But there is some good stuff out there, I must admit.
I was going to say, I mean, for me, there's still not enough hours in the day.
But in a funny kind of way, you're still working though, aren't you? Because you work for St. John's.
Yeah, obviously I'll do that.
So you still have a purpose.
Oh,
My
absolutely.
purpose has kind of been taken. So I've got all the time in the world to fulfil my hobbies, as it were. Do you know what I mean? I can decorate the house if I want to. I've done the gardening. I have done that much because the weather's been nice. But generally, my general motivation isn't at my normal level. When I'm working and when I've got my day-to-day routines going on, I'm a lot more productive than I am in this time where I've got time. And I did a bit of beating myself up about that, as in, you're just being lazy and come on. And then it's like, oh, God. And you know what I mean? And I thought, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to get myself into that, beating myself up because I'm not being, uber productive. Because it will happen when it happens. And I always find whenever I've tried to force any creativity or if I've tried to force anything, it's never worked anyway. So I've kind of just got myself into doing something, even if that's 3 o'clock in the morning. Do you know what I mean? If it's at that time in the morning and I want to, I don't know, I sorted my clothes out the other week at 4 o'clock in the morning, you know what I mean? Just because I was awake and the urge came upon me. But it was very much like... it's a very strange feeling.
Yeah. Well, if you're both that bored, and you want something to do, I do have some St John Ambulance forms for you both to join and help out in hospitals.
Honestly, Dr. Kerry is in the house.
You can imagine you walk in and go, "No, I'm fine. Look, exercises and jumping up."
All of a sudden, I'm overproductive.
Up and about. And
bored is not a term I would use for it.
It's the way you put your gloves on, Kerry, that you do it.
It's an extra snap, isn't it?
Yeah, you two behave.
Bored is definitely not a term I would use. I wouldn't sit here and say I'm bored. That's not an adjective I would use.
No, cool.
So I don't know what it is. If that makes it's a really strange. All I can say is it's one of the most surreal times of my life.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's the same for everybody, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay. So, right, now we've got all that out of the way, let's crack on with tonight's subject. Now, we're talking about facts from fiction. Mm-hmm. So we're taking a fictitious story and looking at the true story behind it.
Mm-hmm. This actually came out. We was talking the other night about things that happened this time last year.
Yeah,
it's actually where this came out. Now, on the 15th of April last year, we was all worried about Notre Dame because that was on fire.
Yeah,
that's
you know
right,
what?
yeah.
To this day, I still think it's inside a job, and I think it was an insurance job by the Hunchback.
By the Hunchback
you reckon?
himself.
Yeah, yeah. The Hunchback of Notre Dame. He's a little bit skint these days. You know, his book's not selling as much as he used to. So he thought, you know, what can I do to get a few quid? I know, I'll burn a place down.
Well, oh God, I'm going to call it the Hunchback of Notre Dame now. The Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris is very iconic. It's absolutely, or had absolutely phenomenal Gothic architecture, didn't it? It's one of those very iconic buildings that no matter where you are in the world, it's one of those buildings that the majority of people will probably have recognised in its heyday. And it has got this whole mythology about the Hunchback of Notre Dame, as Paul has said. Now, all of this, it all comes into a conversation that me and the guys were having. Because I'd also, one of my favourite stage shows is Phantom of the Opera. And I got looking into this, and I've written a blog on that. So we're not going to really go into that particular one. And we, you know, off the back of the Phantom of the Opera scenario, we started looking at, it all kind of like tied together. It's like a year ago today, the cathedral burnt down. And is there any like basis in fact in the Hunchback of Notre Dame? It just kind of led in, didn't it?
It did, and yeah, you know, these things often do. You know, we often have our little chats and end up at the bottom of the rabbit warren.
The famous rabbit hole, yeah.
Yeah, that's it.
Very much so. Well, this is how it gives you a little glimpse, everybody, into how the three of us work together, what kind of conversations go behind the scene. And then we get a show out of it because, you know, we go, oh, that's interesting, you know. So we decided to have a little look at not just the Hunchback of Notre Dame. We're going to talk about that first, but there are others as well. And then bring it more into the modern times. And it feels very relevant, actually, right now, because how much information is being shared out there that is fake, quite frankly?
Quite a bit.
Quite a lot, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we thought, rather than getting too heavy into conspiracy theory, we thought we'd sort of shine a light on how something can get twisted into something completely different from where it originated from.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so we're going to look at the Hunchback of Notre Dame to start with, is where we're going. Now, this was actually just a novel by Victor Hugo. It was actually published in French in 1831 as Notre Dame de Paris. Oh, I'm bringing out my French accent again.
Ooh,
Our Lady of Paris, would that be, Terry?
It's very good, Richard. I'm actually impressed. I'm so good at the French accent, it's untrue. You really need to do the Chateau de la Neuve or whatever it was called.
Chateau de Rennes or something.
De Rennes, yeah. We need to do that one again because I did that in a whole French accent, everybody. Everyone loved that one. Anyway, back to the Hunchback of Notre Dame.
Go on, Esmeralda, off you go.
Now, the story centres on Quasimodo, the deformed bell ringer of the Notre Dame Cathedral, and his unrequited love for Esmeralda.
Oh,
That's sweet.
There's a proper little love story going on here.
yeah.
But it is complete fiction.
I was going to say, was there a real person called Esmeralda?
No,
But, okay.
completely fictional.
Mm-hmm.
This is. But what it does is it brings out several themes throughout that is reflective of the time.
Mm.
Right.
And that's the thing with stories, isn't it? They're very reflective of the time.
Absolutely, but it also sort of had obviously a moral of the story as well, didn't it? You know, that there was always that underlying thing about, you know, being ugly and deformed or whatever, and you could still do what normal people do, if that makes sense. And that's quite indicative of other stories like Beauty and the Beast, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly has all the elements which we would recognise in a story like The Hunchback of Notre Dame. You know, it's got the love angle in there. It's got possibly hints of the, I've got to say this word right, the unacquainted love and the sort of, you know, the two love interests after the same girl. And I think there's even a bit of murder and in there and everything. So, yeah, it ticks all the boxes for a sort of like a classic novel of the time.
It certainly does. Now, basically, as the guys have said, you've got Quasimodo, right? In
Yep.
love with Esmeralda. God, I can't even say her name now. But there are two other men that are also vying for her affection. You've got Quasimodo's adoptive father, the archdeacon himself, Dom Claude Frollo, and a captain, Phoebus de Chateaupeuse. There you go. I have a little bit of
Right.
French there for you. Right. Now, Esmeralda gets a bit blown away by the captain Phoebus, arranges to meet him one night. Frollo, Archdeacon Frollo, sees them, stabs Phoebus.
Oh, yes, he comes out of the cupboard, doesn't he? He
Yeah,
spies on.
very jealous, very jealous.
Yeah.
Now, Quasimodo's not in this bit at all. He don't know none of this. Basically, Esmeralda runs into the cathedral, and Quasimodo helps her.
Oh, isn't that nice of him?
Right, by hiding her. But is betrayed by Frollo again, who then throws her to the crowd, basically. And she gets, falsely accused of witchcraft, as most women did, and, murdering Phoebus. But Phoebus isn't dead. He's not actually dead. He just is, been stabbed a bit, but he's not dead. But this Frollo is the bad character. This archdeacon is actually the bad character in this, not Quasimodo.
Oh, so Quasimodo's dad is the bad guy.
Basically.
Spoiler alert, everybody.
Spoiler alert. Yeah.
Spoiler alert, yeah.
So, yeah. Anyway, Esmeralda gets hanged. And then Quasimodo pushes Frollo, the archdeacon, off the roof.
Good, he deserved that.
Yeah.
Phoebus in all this is too busy nursing the knife that is in his back at the moment. Do you know what I mean? But this is the whole fiction. It's all fictional, but it brings up things that were prevalent at the time. Now, when I was reading through this, I was thinking it reminds me, with Quasimodo, very much reminds me of a character you would expect to see in P.T. Barnum's Museum of Extraordinary Inequities.
Yeah,
Yep.
absolutely.
Of course, yeah.
Is he's perceived as a monster based on his physical look. You know what I mean? Based on his deformity, and therefore he couldn't possibly be a good character. He had to be wicked because he had this deformity.
Yeah, well, back in those days, yes, you would have judged people entirely on how they looked. Mm-hmm. And if you were unfortunate enough to have quite a pronounced deformity, like Quasimodo, yeah, you would have been ridiculed, and it must have been a wretched life for people like that back then.
Yeah.
So, but they often portrayed evil people as having deformities, even like Shakespeare and Richard III.
Mm-hmm.
He was given like a more hunched back than. Some of his features were a little bit more embellished than what he was like in real life.
Yeah, but Quasimodo is more or less the good guy in this, though, isn't it? I suppose it's a early sort of morality tale of saying it's not what you look like and stuff; it's your actions that count. And he did actually try and do the right thing.
But then that's the same sort of thing as Beauty and the Beast as well.
Yeah.
So it all sort of ties in a bit.
It's that story, isn't it, of not judging a book by its cover, basically, or not believing the hype, because the perception of Quasimodo throughout the book is that he isn't normal. He's almost supernatural. He prowls around at night. He hangs around in the cathedral. He's a shady, shadowy character in the book, because he isn't. Believe it or not, he's turned out to end up being like a main character. And although he is a main character, the story of Esmeralda with Frollo and Phoebus is actually more the character. He's very in the shadows admiring Esmeralda rather than the gloriously handsome Captain Phoebus, and then you've got the very staid and straight-laced archdeacon character, all fixated on this girl, who is actually also kind of seen as a kind of monster. She was accused of witchcraft and of bewitching people, so they act in these ways, and she's like, her background in the book is not very good. She was like You know, she was kidnapped as a child, brought up by the Roma. You know, she was then, taught dancing and became a dancer, and this is how she caught the eye of these three people. And you know what I mean? So even Esmeralda, her association with the Roma, the gypsies.
Yeah, I was going to say, are the Roma the gypsies? Yeah, I should imagine.
That's right. Even she has got the witchcraft and the supernatural and being exotic and, living slightly a different cultural way to the rest of them. So they took, the perception in the book is that she's actually a monster too, that she's evil too, when her only crime really is dancing, being brought up culturally different, and being pretty enough to attract three men, very, very different characters.
I mean, again, that. So basically, what you're saying is that rather than being a true story, it's a fictitious love triangle or love square, whatever way you look at it. But it happened at a time where all these other things that are mentioned in the story really happened. Almost like Titanic, where you had that love triangle thing with Rose and whatever his name was.
Leo.
Yeah, Leonardo DiCaprio. Obviously, that bit was fictitious, but it happened within a true story, true event.
Yes, I think this is true of a lot of sort of novels and stuff, especially sort of back in this time and before. You would take sort of true events, real accurate locations, and overlay and put a veneer of a fictitious story and over the top of them, but that story was still there to relay an important message or whatever the author wanted to relay through the story, which with the Hunchback of Notre Dame, and as you say, Paul, sort of like a love triangle, but each character has different sorts of traits. I mean, Quasimodo, obviously with his deformities, you have the captain guy, the dashing good-looking one, and then you have the sort of the villain of the piece, the principal villain, which is Quasimodo's father.
What I'm saying is that the people in the book or in the story are fictitious.
Yeah.
But the events that's there surrounding them.
The cultural events, you mean, like the
Yeah.
society?
Yeah.
It is a contemporary novel, as you would call it.
Yeah.
It's set at the time. Yeah.
Exactly. It's reflecting society's like standards and morals and setup within the fiction. But the actual characters are all fictitious. They're completely fictitious. The reason people kind of think it was true was because he devoted actually 2 chapters of the novel describing the cathedral itself. So he really got a flavour of the strength of the cathedral. So because of that, it sort of holds up the story, as it were. So because he's so... You can visualise the cathedral itself in such detail because of the way he describes it, and the Gothic architectural elements of it, and the stained glasses and the buttresses, and all of that he describes in such detail in the book. And then you've got to remember also at the time the novel was written, which was between 1828 and 1831. Now don't get me wrong, I'm no historical expert or political expert, but you've got to remember that in France, this wasn't long after the French Revolution.
No, so they were just coming out of tumultuous times and stuff like that. So there would have been sort of like a whole new audience to write for. People were thinking differently. I mean, France was sort of moving forward. They were breaking away from the old sort of order and on the cusp of a new order. And perhaps Victor Hugo was trying to sort of overlay that sort of drama set around these fictitious characters.
And maybe try to remind people not to completely ignore the past, People
Yeah.
wanted to move away from the past, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that. But he's also putting a reminder in there that there was good. Look at this beautiful architecture that's there. Those are the things. We can't rip it all down, everybody. You know what I mean? It's still an integral part of us. Although we still want to move forward, these are the qualities we want to get rid of, not everything. So don't view something like something different or physically different or culturally different as bad, as monsters. Maybe we should be looking at the rot in regard to certain traits we have within ourselves, like the staidness and the hierarchy of being a captain and stuff like that, all those things. The captain himself didn't actually have that much power. He got stabbed in the back. Other than his love interest for Esmeralda and his seduction techniques, should we say, again, that's a very stereotypical viewpoint of a dashing captain. You know what I mean? When you start looking at it and breaking it down, there's a deeper, more underlying story there, which is what the author was trying to bring forward. But also say, just because we've got these, we can break that down without ruining this beautiful architecture and the complete past that we've got to do. We can move forward. We can bring a new way of thinking without totally ruining it. We can't forget where we came from and look at this beautiful cathedral and all that it represents. And he weaves this story within this beautiful cathedral, and it's very, you have to it's very a lot of subtexting, underneath the story. But it is a work of fiction set within a real location.
Yeah, and especially during and after the French Revolution, there was a general sort of kickback against the establishment and established hierarchies like the church and stuff, and a lot of these places were actually being destroyed and sort of razed to the ground. So Hugo was obviously trying to step in and say, look, hold stock. I mean, it's not all about this, look and look into yourselves as well.
Yeah, the monster could be within.
Yeah.
Your own prejudices.
And as you said, it's almost like, don't judge a book by its cover.
Yeah, very much so.
Because the people you expect to be the monsters and the good guys, well, actually, it's the other way around.
Exactly. But this isn't the first time that, a story, a story evolves, doesn't it? I mean, God, if you read Hugo's book to what Disney put out as The Hunchback of Notre Dame, completely separate. It's completely different. But we also have a very funny way in particularly, and I'm sorry, Disney fans out there, but they do sanitise things a lot. I mean, you only have to look at Cinderella. Now, this was one that Paul had actually looked at quite extensively, didn't you? Because Cinderella, my God, this blew my mind. This is a poor old Cinders. Paul?
Yeah, there is different versions of this Cinderella all over the world, because apparently there's the Greek version of the tale. I can't remember for the life of me what the prince's name was, but the point where Cinderella ran away from the ball in the Greek version. One of the shoes was carried off by an eagle. Cool. And the eagle takes the shoe across the Mediterranean and drops it on the lap of an Egyptian king. And then obviously the king goes looking for the shoe's owner and eventually finds the character, the Cinderella type character, and marries her, and taking her, sweeping her off her feet and making her an Egyptian queen. There's loads of different versions of Cinderella.
Yeah, and it seems, this sort of, that's a very early version, and these sort of, but these sort of stories, again, they're very archetypal, they seem to be, because they seem to sort of spread up in different parts of the world at the time when, there was no real sort of contact between each other. So there must be some sort of psyche set in the mind that actually sort of craves for these sorts of stories, and they do follow a sort of set narrative.
Yeah, I mean, again, there's another one, China, and it's the Tao of Yi Xian. I think that's how it's pronounced. According to the ancient origins, she was a motherless daughter of a cave-dwelling chieftain. And basically, they've got the same similar sort of cast to Cinderella, and like including like the stepmother and stepsister. And in place of a fairy godmother, Yi Zion has the magical bones of a fish, which grants her wishes.
Cool.
Ooh.
Yeah,
Oh.
and obviously that's their version of Cinderella. But I do believe the ones that Brothers Grimm wrote were really quite gruesome.
Yeah, sort of like the Grimm's fairy tales. Even though we associate fairy tales today was as children's tales, they weren't. I mean, the collection the Grimm's put together, they were sort of out and about, collecting the folk tales, and they weren't actually meant for sort of a children's audience. They were just a collection of folk tales which they were collating and sort of bringing together.
So when you say folk tales, are these like verbally passed down?
Yeah, so I think sort of like a bit like sort of like a folklorist will do today. They go out and they will try and save. I mean, the Grimm brothers obviously realised there was a rich heritage of stuff, but none of it had been written down. So they were the first people to go out and actually write these tales down.
Mm.
So they basically, because in the olden days you'd have like a storyteller that would go from village to village and make his money by relating stories, and that's how he would get his money, wouldn't he? And it would be a very, you know, festive affair when the storyteller came to town. I'm sure there was probably an official name for them, but you know, they would wander, wouldn't they? The wandering storyteller with usually a lute, and they would go into the village, entertain for a couple of nights or a night, and then move on. You know,
Yeah,
very,
that's
very
right.
transient lifestyle. So, did the Grimm brothers sort of like collate those kind of stories?
Well, across Europe, there was more than 500 versions of the same theme. Among the most famous are the Tales of Aschenputtel, written down. Then that one was written down by the Brothers Grimm,
Okay.
and Glambastista, Basil Las Gata is another story as well. So, I mean, I've not read that particular one. You know, I've not seen the film. Maybe they did sort of mash the two together and come up with Cinderella.
Yeah, I don't think I've read that one because I don't think I'll get past the title.
No, no.
Yeah.
Giambastista Pasilagata Senenterola. Basically, Cinderella.
Yeah,
But like
now
you
you know
say,
why Disney shortened it. I
well,
think.
yeah, like, you can totally understand that, right? But again, like you said, these are a lot darker. These folk tales are a lot darker than the sanitised version that we see today of these
Oh
tales,
yeah,
aren't they?
those folk tales were full of murder, mutilation, cannibalism, and incest, and
Yeah,
just
I mean,
yeah, and it was
they
literally from all around the globe.
they were sort of like reflecting sort of not practices of the time, but the realities of the time. You know, sort of life was tough back then, and people would have sort of related to these tales. They probably would have understood them better than obviously what we understand them now, because we're looking at them from a modern perspective, and we find them very sort of distasteful. But to the contemporary audience, they would have understood exactly what was being said.
But one thing that they do reflect is, like you say, the mindset of the society of that time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
And in regards to Cinderella, it is very much that positioning of how women were viewed and treated, the powerlessness of women, that the only way they
Yes.
were going to get ahead was to marry above themselves, basically. You know,
absolutely.
it wasn't down to her own power; it was down to the fact that she married the prince. You know, that he deigned enough to, you know, go and look for her and pick her out of obscurity. It wasn't anything she particularly did. I mean, all right, so she had a bit of a helping hand by a fairy godmother, you know, and maybe a few friendly little animals. But, you know, ultimately, it was him who picks her out of
Yes.
obscurity, and then she becomes, you know, it's man's power then.
Yes, it's man's power.
I think like the modern version of Cinderella that we know, and possibly the one that Disney's portrayed, originates in France around the 17th century, and it was called Cendrillon, and it was a book by Charles Perrault, and it was published in 1697, and it was the first version to include the pumpkin and the fairy godmother and a few other animals that helped Cinderella find her prince. So I think most of our modern day version of it is taken from that version.
Yeah, it seems like sort of from that point on that this is where the story was more sort of sanitized and brought into sort of line to make it more possibly tasteful for the audiences of the time, because certainly the 17th century was a time when things were starting to be looked at and we were pulling out of the Middle Ages, so to speak, and the Enlightenment and everything. So there was a general shift in consciousness and the way that we should behave to one another.
It's almost like the first step to health and safety then, isn't it?
Well, you could
common sense guide.
Yeah.
But there's even a witchcraft theme there, because the fairy godmother is like a fairy coming in with her magic wand to change things, transfigure things into things that, like the pumpkin into the carriage and the mice into the horses, and stuff like that. It's a witchcrafty thing going on there. So it's like, it's like this woman, although she hasn't necessarily asked for it, she's just staring into the cinders. I'm like, oh, I can't go to the ball. Do you know what I mean? It's when you start breaking it down and start looking at it, again, it's not her who's done this. This is like a witchy thing. She's, this has come to her and done her a massive favour. But it's actually, Cinderella herself didn't actually do a lot, did she? She just had a good time at the party, come home, lost her shoe. And all of the events that happened afterwards was really down to the man. And it's this, it's, again, there's this witchcrafty thing. And this is actually a theme, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, and certainly what you say is just taking you back a bit, Kerry, sort of like the start of the Cinderella story and pretty much most of the way through it, it seems to be sort of a power struggle between sort of women. The sisters, the stepmother, the disenfranchised daughter and everything, all sort of haggling and sort of trying to vie for a position in the household and stuff. But then at the end, this is when the prince, the man, comes in and sort of sees what's right and what is wrong and rewards the unfortunate for who is doing right. The sort of sees the actual right person in the whole situation that's going on. But
she doesn't seem to be her own salvation. It's all come from something else.
Yes.
That's kind of the point. She's quite passive, really, isn't she? She would never have got off her own butt and stormed the party in her own right, and I've got every right to come to the party even if I'm in my Cinder's outfit. Do you know what I mean? She was very passive. If it wasn't for this magical intervention, shall we say, she would never have got there. But, it's one of those, isn't it, that's, again, like Paul said right at the beginning, there are so many different versions of this, and it goes back a lot further than I realised. I thought this was quite a modern, I say modern, I would have put it at sort of like 17th century, which it pretty much was. That was a sanitised version, wasn't it? It went back 2,000 years, and even, like you said, there was like a similar story from Greece, a similar story from China. So there is this morality tale there, isn't there?
I think that's what fairy tales were initially, just to be a morality story. You could probably, there are stories out there, even going back to the Bible. Even the Chronicles of Narnia, for example. If you watch the first one, I mean, I don't particularly know about the others, but it's got a very religious undertone to it.
Yeah, Narnia was it C.S. Lewis?
Yes, C.S. Lewis.
And he was a great theologian of his day, so I can quite understand. I don't know the Lion, the Witch, the Wardrobe and stuff. I don't know.
It was that one. It was the Lion, Witch and the Wardrobe, where obviously the children found themselves into Narnia. One of the children, Edward, he betrayed his family by trying to give him up to the Queen, basically.
Hmm.
And Aslan was the one that died for Edward's sins.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. Certainly
sort
see
of-
the religious undertone. Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
not too familiar with the story myself, but
But you even had the Wicked Witch in there as well, the Snow
Absolutely.
Queen.
I mean, yeah,
You know,
and if you're looking at it at a religious point of view as well, you've got the Ice Queen, which would be the devil or the dark side, and then you've got Aslan, which would be God,
yeah.
and even when the children were found in Narnia, they were called sons of Adam and daughters of Eve.
so we've got completely moralistic tales being told, really,
Mhm.
where we're teaching, even the Bible. I'm not condoning religion at all.
No, but
I'm not bashing religion at all either. But they're
no, but there
moralistic
are moral
tales, aren't they?
stories.
They've got no
Yeah, they are.
basis in fact.
No, they're just overlaid on particular time periods.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
But they
that
are
is-
all sort of tales that try to teach you to be good
yeah,
in the eyes of God, basically, and that's sort of where it goes. But yeah, I mean, there's moralistic stories in pretty much all of it, really.
Okay, so carrying on with the good old Disney theme, Snow White.
we all like a bit
Yeah,
of Snow White, don't we?
Richard's turn for Snow White.
Yeah, come on, Richard. Fill us in on the old Snow White.
Well, and as you know, and Snow White is a classic it is the classic Disney cartoon. I mean, I even think it's down as the top 10 films of all time. And again, this follows the story of a beautiful young girl who is banished by a vain and very cruel, jealous stepmother, who, with the help of but then she finds the help of 7 lovable dwarves, by all accounts, and ultimately finds an everlasting true love. But Walt Disney actually turned this fable into as I said earlier, an animated classic back in 1937. But Snow White and the 7 Dwarfs is to this day, well, one of the top 10 films. But again, the story does actually go back a fair way, and the sanitized version we know today is not quite what the version originally was.
No.
Grimm. Back to the Grimms.
Yes.
It was, yeah, the Grimms again, that were the ones that...
I think Disney definitely had this book of nursery rhymes and fairy tales and household tales at his fingertips when he was looking for material for his films, to be quite frank. Because all of the films we're talking about, The Hunchback of Notre Dame, Cinderella, Snow White, Rapunzel, all of these kind of stories are well known now thanks to Walt Disney.
Yeah,
Well, I
absolutely.
think-
And most of the Grimm stories as well all come... I mean, I don't know if it was just the Grimms, but the Grimm brothers almost like centred their stories around the Black Forest in that area of Europe.
Yeah, I mean, this is the area the Grimms actually were from. They were from, what is modern day Germany, but from the Black Forest area. So these tales were quite prevalent around the sort of like the southern Germany area.
Mm-hmm. Now, the more modern film that you see with Snow White in particular seems to be a little bit more, I'll say a little bit more relevant to the original story that the Grimms put out there. Because the original story, the Evil Queen asks the hunter to take Snow White into the forest to kill it. To kill her, even.
Yeah.
Not it, to kill her. But in the original version, the child is only 7.
Yeah. I think Disney upgraded her to about 14, didn't they?
Yeah, because everyone wants to murder their teens.
No comment. The Queen orders the huntsman to actually bring back Snow White's internal organs. Right, she wanted her lungs and her liver, whereas that got changed to her heart.
Yes, that's
Okay.
right. Yeah.
He does kill a boar because he just couldn't do it. He just couldn't kill the 7-year-old. So he killed a boar and brought back the boar's lungs and the liver, and the queen like eats them. Lovely, right?
Yeah.
She told the cook to boil them with salt.
I suppose they need a bit of flavour, don't they? The
Yeah,
salt
but
brings out the
seasoning.
flavour. Yeah, but yeah, quite grim. Excuse the pun.
Now I have to say, this weren't the first time she tried to kill us. She tried 3 other times as well, various means, and it is really thanks to the dwarves. The dwarves, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Can we name the dwarves just out of curiosity?
I mean, you got Sleepy,
Sleepy,
Dopey,
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 Doc,
Sneeze,
Doc and Sneezy,
Sneezy, yeah, Grumpy,
Grumpy,
Happy,
Happy.
and one more. And who are we
Bashful.
missing? Bashful. Yeah.
Bashful. Well
Don't forget
done.
Bashful.
Well done, my boys.
I often associate Bashful, poor Bashful, bit like
Yeah.
you, really.
Oh, poor Bashful. But thanks to these guys that, she actually manages to escape each trap that the evil queen sets her. First of all, she put on a corset that was so tight that Snow White passes out and the dwarves cut the laces on the corset. The second time was a poisoned comb that she put into her hair, and the dwarves took it out. You'd think she would have clicked on this 7-year-old by now, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
And then the third time was the poisonous apple, which we see in the Disney film, right? So they miss out the first two. Now she's placed in a glass coffin. Now this is where, again, Disney changes it. Right, because it's romantic, isn't it? She's in this glass coffin, and the prince comes along and goes, "Oh, I need to say goodbye," and just gives her a mwah, little old kiss, and miraculously she awakens. That's not actually what the Grimm said. It's basically the dwarves were carrying the coffin out the house. One falls over, jostles Snow White, and the piece of apple that was lodged in her throat falls out, and she can then breathe.
Yeah.
Right, nothing to
Yeah.
do with kisses at all. That's just pure romance. Walt Disney loved a bit of romance, I will say that, right?
They probably took that from kissing frogs from other tales, I suppose. It's romantic, isn't it? You can't have a dwarf falling over and dropping the casket, basically.
Unfortunately, it has spread a whole generation of women thinking that romance is done in this way, and men have not. We kind of picked up on the prince role, is all I'm saying. Us girls are kind of expecting that fairy tale now, and men kind of went, I don't think so. That's not what we like, really. We like a lumberjack kind of men.
I was to say, Disney's got a lot to answer
It's got
for.
a lot to answer for in women's expectations in a relationship, is all I'm saying.
Yeah.
Whereas if they read the Grimm stories, then maybe their expectations wouldn't be as high.
No, totally. And they're more chance of getting that deal than most, I think.
But I have to say, even in the Grimm story, they do eventually meet, like the prince and Snow White do fall in love and they do get married, forgetting the small minor detail that Snow White is only 7 years old.
Yes.
Yes. There you go.
But we're looking at it with modern eyes. Still, to this day, we look at it with modern eyes. We go, oh my God, 7 years of age, jeepers. That wasn't uncommon back in the days.
I think it depends on the cultures as well.
Yeah, I mean,
even these days, there's ages of consent all over the world, and in the UK, the age of consent is 16. Now, if you go over to Holland, I think isn't their age of consent 12?
Really?
I
think it is
it's
actually
something like that. And to look at it from our point of view, it's like that's a bit wrong. But to them, it's perfectly normal.
Well, I don't think this was so much sort of like the common people. I mean, there's certainly a bit of an overtone of the prince, and this is a marriage of sort of more of the political sort of marriage, which did happen in sort of like courts at the time.
Yeah, they would even betroth as babies, wouldn't they?
Yes, that's right, and they would betroth, for alliances and political means and stuff like that. That was very common. Not so much in the general populace, but certainly higher up in societies with well-to-do families and stuff. It certainly was very common.
Very much so. Now, the Queen in the Grimm's fairy story is a little bit gruesome. How she ends her life, basically. She's punished by putting on some iron shoes, which are heated on burning coals. They put them on her feet, and then she has to dance until she falls down dead.
Well, there you go.
Mm.
A shoe thing again,
Yeah,
everybody.
yeah.
I mean, automatically eat your heart
Yeah,
out, right?
that sounds fair.
Yeah.
But I don't think Disney wanted to go down that route because they wanted to do a spin-off, didn't they, with Maleficent?
Oh, yeah.
That's the witch, isn't it, in Snow White?
Yeah, they spun it
and
again,
they've
didn't they? And made it,
yeah.
she wasn't that evil. It was all, it was,
A bit of a
influences on her.
misunderstanding.
Yeah, misunderstood. Why she turned all evil, and she's just not. She's quite nice, really. It was only because the wrongs done to her, she turned into a twisted and bitter, dark witch kind of thing. So yeah.
And this is why maybe it's the whole men issue. She obviously watched Disney and she had this totally wrong perception of men.
Who, Maleficent?
I reckon I'll go with that.
Okay.
And she got screwed over because she got this high expectation, obviously through Disney, where if she'd stuck with a Grimm version, she would have been dead. So,
but they did seem, when you look at some of the stories that we've looked at, Cinderella, when we started looking at that, it's the shoe thing interested me. We've got this with Snow White. The shoe thing is very, very symbolic, I would say.
Yeah, and I'm trying to sort of think about that. I'm sort of trying to plumb the depths of my sort of historical knowledge and to try and think what shoes actually sort of symbolise or represent. But I'm not really coming up with anything. I can't really try and attach it to anything. I'm usually quite good at that sort of thing, but no, shoes, no.
Well, just to keep.
I can't.
Is it about your ability to, if you can't walk, you lose?
Yeah.
It's an ability, isn't it? If you lose that, it's a fundamental ability of being able to work, being able to do anything, And
yeah.
Is it about that?
What if you incapacitate somebody's feet? Yes, quite possibly. It would have been. Yes, it probably would have been quite a punishment. You take away someone's ability to actually, walk. So, yeah.
I mean, we know, go back to Cinderella, that we know that the Chinese, going back to the Chinese version of that particular story, they were very much into binding feet because small feet were very attractive, weren't they?
Yes, I mean, the foot binding practice and everything, was which went on to relatively recently. But yes, and small feet, and these women would have their literal feet bound from babies, really. And I've actually seen historical photographs of from the 19th century, and they are quite disturbing to look at.
And the story in the Chinese version of Cinderella is that the stepsisters had big feet and actually cut bits off their feet to try and fit into the shoe that was left behind.
They did.
Whereas Cinderella obviously had beautifully tiny incy feet and slipped perfectly into the shoe with no problem. So this feet thing is, and the shoe thing, it's very fundamental in a lot of these Grimm stories. So when you start looking at it and breaking it down, certain themes come through. The witchcraft theme, the foot thing, you know what I mean? The dancing. I mean, I know all those are socially, they're all social standards, aren't they? How well someone could dance would make them more attractive and, things like that all become themes that run through. And like Paul said earlier on, character traits then influence how the character is depicted in visual.
Yeah, she's, and as we were saying, particularly, I mean, this particularly came out with the Quasimodo story, with the three main characters in that, sort of like the, and his father, the bishop. I mean, you get a mental image just by what is written about him, and that creates a mental image of what sort of person he is. You're judging everyone on basically their appearance.
Exactly, and
Things
going
like
right
that.
back to the beginning of the story, talking Phantom of the Opera. Again, you've got that very visual bad image of like the Phantom is like this shadowy character that lives in the shadows. You know, his face is masked because of a deformity, and ultimately he just wanted to be accepted and fell in love with the lead character. There's a lot of comparisons between Hunchback of Notre Dame and the Phantom of the Opera story when you start looking at it, and we see the current themes going through each story. You know, you've got that kind of correlation between the two stories based in France. You've got multiple stories going through with Cinderella from various cultures through. You know, when we're starting to look at Grimm's, these are all stories that were passed down and embellished by somebody and told by somebody else. And by the time it gets to the Grimm's, they write them all down, and they're a lot darker. They're a lot more socially, culturally, you know, set at set at the time, but current themes run through, and there tends to be a witchcraft or a supernatural theme that runs through each of them, which if you look at the cultural time, that was very prevalent as well.
Well, yes, it would have been a prevalent thing and accepted thing. A lot of people would have come across it, so that would have been a familiar sort of thread for sort of like the people that listened to these tales originally. I mean, I shouldn't imagine they would have read them because they weren't written down. So you would sort of back it with sort of the folk magic of the time.
See, being the Brothers Grimm were from the Black Forest area. Was that a big area for paganism?
I'm not too sure. Sort of paganism. It's sort of like the Black Forest, sort of southern Germany, Bavaria, and stuff. It's a very rural part of.
So you'd probably have witchcraft and stuff. Prevalent in those areas anyway.
Yes,
so that would have had an influence on.
Yeah.
You know, even stories like Hansel and Gretel. You know, because that's set in the Black Forest, and well, you know the story of them anyway. So you know,
I mean, you've got a lot of elements there. You've got the forest as well, which conjures up a lot. I mean, even today, I mean, we like a good wood or a forest when we go out, don't we? To sort of on our little like sort of day trips and investigations. Well, yeah, true.
Yeah.
There's a fairy tale there of a poor man. He's still seen today staggering around.
Mentally scarred in that area.
But again, even in Hansel and Gretel, it's, you know, you're looking at traits of, you know, greed and those kind of themes running through. They don't prosper, do they? And, you know, like temptation and greed come into that very much so. And but I think
these would have been everything the audience would have recognised. They would have recognised. I mean, I'm thinking of let's take something which again, it's and it is related to this. I mean, we all remember the Punch and Judy shows, don't we?
Yeah.
On the beach, and you look at them and break them down. The traditional ones, they are extremely violent.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, Punch with the baby and everything, whacking it over the head with the stick and stuff. But that was a representation of the time. You know, he sort of beats his mother, his wife, and his wife beats Punch and stuff. That, and even though we look at it now as entertainment and fun, and at the time, and the audience was said, well, yeah, and my wife gives me a good clobber at home, you know, and stuff like that. It's a way of release. It was the way the people sort of went out, looked at it, could be some sort of release from their everyday lives, but they had to recognise what was going on.
Never did work out where the crocodile came into it.
No, I can't really figure out where the crocodile did, but
the crocodile only came into it to steal the sausages.
Well, yeah, the crocodile a bit of a penchant for sausages, and so did Mr. Hunt.
Because we all have a crocodile on our Victorian promenades, don't we?
Maybe. Richard hit upon this the other night. Maybe it's a sort of twist, because wasn't there a crocodile in the Thames?
Yes, there was a menagerie at the Thames, and it possibly comes from that. But the original Punch and Judy sort of stories and stuff, it was an import during the 17th century into England from Italy. So whether, well, as far as
I've
I'm
heard
aware,
stories of crocodiles in Italy as well, like in Venice.
yeah. So
Yeah,
there
when
is
they get lost.
there is cases from the menagerie at the Tower of London during sort of like the Middle Ages when they used to bring over, because we've all heard of the famous when they used to have the polar bear there, didn't they? And they used to swim that in the Thames, and that is very well documented. But some of the more exotic creatures like crocodiles, which they would have got from North Africa, because you would have had crocodiles in the Nile at the time. You don't get them there now; they're a lot further south, but they would have been brought over. And there are sort of stories that some of these actually got out and into the Thames and sort of come up into like sort of, there's a few stories around Suffolk and stuff like that of these sort of little sort of river sort of oddities, sort of monsters, sort of reptile monsters, and they think there may be a link.
Well.
But that's another story.
But it shows, though, doesn't it? Again, we've got something that happened, something we know, the crocodile and the swimming thing in the Thames. And, it's then born into something like maybe Punch and Judy or, then a whole story then builds up to that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
We've got a whole mythology and a whole folklore that comes out of that. So in going back to the supernatural theme that runs through a lot of the folk tales that we're talking about, that would have been in society. It would have been the natural healer who maybe does weird things with herbs or foraging. And, you would have had puppets and charms that were used to ward off bad luck or the bad fairies or the bad, whatever your belief system was at that time. And it is that theme of witchcraft that runs through. Bearing in mind, you've also had throughout this period in history of where these folk tales of witch trials and the Inquisition and things like that have gone on through that historical time. So that belief in witchcraft is very much prevalent in people's understanding of how the world works. It's not something they stamped out, and it's brought into these stories. It's brought into these folk tales, and every single story has some form of theme of supernatural happenings.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's the main underlay, as I said, and people would have recognised it. But I also sort of feel, and just sort of thinking about it now, there's probably a bit of sort of like state intervention or church intervention, because generally the people that are sort of doing the magic and stuff are usually portrayed as the bad people.
Yes, very much so.
But yeah, that's just a sort of point I've sort of managed to sort of grasp out of this.
They're always the wicked one and always get overcome.
So you can see there was probably sort of like a religious sort of tale there as well.
Which shows how a story gets evolved and changed, but the moral understanding of it remains the same. And it just gets sort of like twisted into the moral standards at the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
On that note, we're actually going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to have a look at some more modern versions of this kind of thing happening and the power of marketing, I will say that. You've been listening to the Paranormal Concept Show, exclusive to the Paranormal UK radio network. Just listen to this and we'll be right back.
Hello, Harry Price here. If there's nothing me and my friends enjoy more here on the other side, it is to sit back and relax and listen to the Paranormal Concept Show, right here on the PAUK radio network. Broadcasting a plethora of interesting and informative content for all your paranormal needs. Find them across social media to keep up to date with forthcoming shows and all their other adventures. Hello, is there anybody there?
And welcome back to the Paranormal Concept Show, exclusive to the Paranormal UK radio network. Before the break, we were talking about folklore and how stories got took from folklore, the travelling storyteller, and bringing those stories with common themes from society and the cultural references of the time through. But we want to have a look at something like a bit more modern. Now, I can't believe it was this long ago. I would just like to say this. But in 1999 at the Sundance Film Festival, there was a screening of a movie Now, this movie took the festival actually by storm, but this was before it hit mainstream. How it was released to mainstream was masterful, quite frankly, because they released a documentary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The documentary basically outlined the story before what you would see in the film.
Yeah.
It was very, very well done. I hook, line and sinkered it. I'm talking, of course, about the Blair Witch movie. Do we remember this, guys? Do we remember the hype around this movie?
I remember the hype, and I remember the adverts and everything else for it, but I've never actually watched it.
Haven't you? Oh, right,
Okay.
yeah.
Well, the documentary was released pre-movie, and basically it's about 3 hikers that have been killed under mysterious circumstances. Basically, the documentary before the movie was released was basically, we found this footage in the camera footage in the base. We're not going to show you the footage. We're just going to tell you what led up to this. If you want to go and see the footage, then it's the film. You go and see the film. People flocked to the cinema to see the film following the documentary. At this time, I wasn't particularly discerning in regards to looking deeper into things. I didn't really know about the Sundance Film Festival. Didn't really care. You know what I mean? I fell for this hook, line and sinker. I went and saw the movie, thought it was absolutely brilliant. And there was a long time between me thinking it was real,
Right.
and then realising it wasn't. Quite frankly. But it was masterfully done.
What happened when you found out that it wasn't real? I mean, how disappointed was you?
Yeah, I was quite. I think it was sort of, I was going to say 1999. It's quite a long time ago now. So although I had a passing interest, I would take everything at face value rather than research something. I mean, you're probably looking at the days before I had a computer, so I was just like believing everything I saw, without looking into it any deeper. So you've got to think pre-internet on this one. So you are believing the hype, what you're seeing on the TV newsreels and what you're seeing in the newspaper and stuff like that. And so, see now, these days, I wouldn't. It's red flags all over it, quite frankly. You know what I mean? Now, but at the time, I wasn't. I was totally suckered into this, but it was actually. I mean, I couldn't wait to go and see the movie. I had to go and see the movie. It made me feel a bit sick, what with the way it was filmed and stuff. But it totally bought into that was something that was absolutely real. Yeah,
because it was filmed by video camera, wasn't it?
Yeah, all by.
And I think it was the first time that they've ever used that sort of imagery.
Yeah, I can remember when I and saw the film. Yeah, and even it didn't fill the whole screen. The film, because as it was shot from normal sort of VHS at the time, I should imagine it was, the screen was actually sort of, 2 big lines down the side, so it gave it everything, you were sort of watching it and thinking, well, it certainly is, video footage.
There was another film, probably going back quite a few years now, that was filmed in a similar way. And I remember going to the cinema to see this. It was a Paranormal Activity, it was called. And the film was absolutely hilarious. I found it funny because obviously we do the investigations and stuff and we learned so much. And to see the ridiculous stuff that was coming up on screen was just hilarious. But there was a bloke a couple of rows away from me that suffered from motion sickness. And, he emptied his popcorn cup and then subsequently filled back up again.
Lovely.
Gruesome. But
so I can imagine it would do the same sort of thing back then as well.
The way it was filmed was like completely not something we'd ever seen before. And I say it was ingenuous, the way they marketed this. It cost them $30,000 to make. Yeah. That was it. $30,000. Nothing when you think about, some of the millions of pounds that are spent on films. It was the way it was done and the way it was filmed was just so fresh.
Yeah, absolutely.
at the
Nothing
time.
ever had been tried like that before.
Well, it sort of spawned a whole new subgenre and genre in movies because now you can't sort of move without the found footage sort of film appearing. You know, you usually get a couple a year now, don't you? And they usually are sort of based around the horror sort of theme, but
But
you know what they are now.
The profit margin was 140 million pounds, or $40 million at the box office.
Yeah, from a $30,000 investment, that's not a bad return.
These days, they don't really make too much money on the movies. I think 9 times out of 10 they make a loss on movies.
It's through the it's through all the merchandising, isn't it? They make the money now.
Yeah, absolutely.
The price of the food in the cinema, I think they make a lot of money. But that's me being cynical.
No. You're actually spot on there because I have actually spoken to the manager at one of the cinema chains, and they have stated that they don't make money on the movies. That's why all the drinks and everything are higher prices.
Yeah,
because they don't make money on the movies anymore.
Wow. I think it depends on what cinema you go to, quite frankly, because some of them are, quite frankly, absolutely extortionate to take the family to.
This is one of the sub-chains that I spoke to, but the biggest owner of so many different chains is Empire. Empire own Cineworld, View, Empire, obviously, Odeon. They own all them companies.
And it is a full experience now. I mean, it is, we're going slightly off topic from Blair Witch, but, going into the cinema, you can get, that 4DX, is it, that you go to quite a lot?
Yeah, that's
chairs
the one with the
move,
moving chairs and the air blowing in your face. And
really?
It's really nice on a hot day.
Shows how long since I've been to the cinema. And do they talk in them as well now? I heard they do. Oh, right.
Cinema's talking. There's colour and everything, Richard.
Yeah.
Oh, right. Oh, okay.
That's it. No more little man in the corner with a piano. And,
Damn, my guide.
none of that reading stuff.
So, Paul, is the Blair Witch based on a true story at all? Do we know?
Going by the research, not really.
Was it like a myth in the town? Because it was based around Maryland, wasn't it?
It was, yeah. I think it's more of an urban legend, to be fair. Yeah, I don't really believe in it too much. That's just me, though.
Okay, the urban legend basically runs that there was a witch named Ellie Kedwood who was banished from a colonial town, Blair, Maryland, hence the Blair Witch, and she was accused of trying to bloodlet from local children in the late 1800s. A child went missing in the forest, and, search parties allegedly went and were dismembered, and blah, 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 blah. And it's an urban legend that didn't really hold water, quite frankly. But the guys took this, Myrick and Sanchez, took this urban legend, basically, and we're going to come on to the urban legend thing, because this is just brilliant, how urban legends take a life of their own. It's just absolutely amazing how an urban legend gets taken by two filmmakers who come up with the concept, who write a script, who then put it out there, that then is marketed in such a way that it's got this urban legend that's behind it. So is it true? Is it not true? Who knows? And then all of a sudden the Blair Witch is born, and now people to this day still go to those woods and try to find the Blair Witch. The whole film has born a whole sequel. I wasn't overly keen on sequels. Thought the original was a standalone, quite frankly.
Yeah, they should have just left it at that, but they couldn't resist, could they? They knew they were onto something good.
That's right. But it is completely urban legend.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And how many times have we seen? I mean, even in my local area, I think every town has some form of urban legend. There's always a derelict cottage where a witch lived, or a nasty man lived, or children went missing, or was killed in there, and there's no basis of fact in it whatsoever. But because it's a derelict building, as kids you're it's scary, so you have to do it, right? It's a bit like trying the Ouija board out for the first time, right? I think I tried that when I was at senior school in the gym. Sorry, Jim, if it's haunted now. That might have been us conjuring up spirits with the Ouija board. And we would write letters on a piece of paper and put them out, and then get a glass from we would have nicked a glass at lunchtime from the canteen, and then we'd, up there with our letter. Really bad when you think about it, And I remember doing that when I was probably what age would I have been? I remember doing that with a girl called Samantha, and that was in primary school, so that was late years of primary. I was 9, 10.
Oh, right. Really? What school did you go to? Hogwarts or something?
Yeah, Hogwarts.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember doing that. And the Bloody Mary at Halloween would do that in the mirror. Oh, we was well into all that sort of stuff.
It certainly sounds like a girly thing to do, because I don't think I've ever really sort of done anything like that. Or perhaps just the group of people I hung around with. They're probably normal by the sounds of it. But there you go. But
yeah, I don't think
maybe it is a girly thing. I don't know. We should do research on that. Is it your early attempts at conjuration? Is it a girl thing or is it a boy thing?
Yeah.
Did you two not do that then?
No.
No.
Oh, just me then, everybody. Yeah, I remember doing it in the gym at the school because my friend was.
Anyway, go.
Oh, sorry, I'm going off on a tangent.
Yeah, we're going way off now. So we're going back to the Blair Witch. You got Ben Rock, who was the production designer on the Blair Witch Project, and he recalled the mythology of origins. Admitting that he was a bit obsessed with anagrams back in the day, because he claimed that one of the characters, or in the legend, was Rasputin. Rustin Parr was the name of the guy, but he thought that it was started as an anagram for Rasputin.
Oh, right.
Mm-hmm. And
so
he did that with Edward Kelly as well. The name Edward Kelly, the British occultist Edward Kelly, which was the witch's name was Ellie Kedward. So Edward Kelly, So they did play around with names as well.
So they certainly had some sort of grounding, a bit of research was done, and they had some sort of grounding in sort of like occult sort of knowledge and stuff like that, because, people like Edward Kelly and Dee, because Edward Kelly was sort of doing a work alongside Dee, wasn't he? And so it certainly shows a bit of research was done. I mean, these were clever people.
They were building a story within a setting. And again, we go back to The Hunchback of Notre Dame. He had his setting, which was the cathedral. They had their setting, which was Burkesville. Do you know what I mean? They had it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's a typical American-style town.
Yeah, I can remember actually seeing the documentary. I think I saw it after the Blair Witch Project or something. But yeah, that was a very sort of them going around this town and people slamming doors in their faces saying they don't want to speak about the legend and stuff. So I can see why that would sort of build up the anticipation to actually go and see the movie.
It's a typical, actually, I think what it showed was a typical American, God-fearing, moralistic town. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. You know what I mean? Wholesome American town.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And sort of like from what I can remember of the documentary, I mean, the locals, I think they sort of spoke to the historian sort of in the library and stuff, but a lot of the locals were very reluctant to sort of go over it. It certainly gave the overtone of that, It sort of like really sort of drew you in to the sort of like the story itself. It had all those elements attached to it, just attaching the mystery of it. Why won't these people talk about it?
You know what? That actually reminds me of something I watched on the Dyatlov Pass the other day, because there was like new evidence or something, or they were going over the case, and they actually went to this part of there was like a little small village near to the Dyatlov Pass, and the locals there were almost like the native people for that area, and they wouldn't talk to anyone either.
No. That's
What?
part of the mythology, though, around the Dyatlov Pass, wasn't it? Because of the names of the mountain ranges.
Oh, yeah, because the two mountains translated, they literally mean something like "don't go there," don't they?
Yeah.
And the other one is a dead mountain or something like that.
Something like that, yeah. So it was the way it translated. So the locals were like, "You just don't go there. Don't talk about it."
Yeah.
Because no one goes there.
Yeah.
You know, so when that...
But I mean, it's
happened,
just that... It's just obviously that those people wouldn't talk to anyone outside that village, and they would often knock on the doors, and no one would answer. No one wanted to talk to them, and they did eventually get someone to talk to them, but it's just sparked that memory off because obviously you said the same thing about this town, but Pittsfield.
The only thing that's creepy in this town was something called Spook Hill. Now, this is an incline just outside of town, and this is going to ring bells to all of you going back to the Haunted Highways show that we did.
Oh, yes, I think I know where you're going with this.
It's an incline just outside of the town where allegedly Civil War soldiers are supposed to push idling cars up the hill late at night.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So we, in the UK, we have Hangman's Hill, because of a hangman that pushes your car up the hill at night. Whereas over in America, they have Civil War soldiers that do that for you.
Oh, right.
And what did we learn from that show about these kind of hills?
It's an optical illusion.
That's right.
Because the road goes down, but the banks of the road go up.
It's where your eyes drawn in by the perspective of the terrain around you, the horizon and stuff, and and if they usually happen in quite enclosed spaces actually, where it is easier for your eye to misinterpret. And there are several places like here in the UK and in the United States and worldwide. Actually, there was a place just outside of Adelaide in Australia where I lived, and that was called Magnetic Hill, I believe, and that had the same phenomena happen. Well, not phenomena, because it was actually proven that it was a decline instead of an incline.
Yeah. So again, we've got that. That's the only thing spooky about the town, apparently.
Nothing then.
Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Now, it's like we said, it's an incredibly small town. It only takes 15 minutes to walk from one end of town to the other. I wonder actually if it's grown since. It does make me wonder.
Yeah.
Has the population
It
grown?
probably has.
Is there a whole tourist industry now built up around the town because of the film?
Yeah, quite possibly.
I mean, going back to the point of the film, wasn't there like something like 75 houses and a post office and a church within town limits, and that was it?
Mm-hmm. But they didn't even have, we were talking about the documentary, it looks very much like it's the residents in there. That wasn't actually the residents, that was actually shot in Germantown, believe it or not. So, yeah, they didn't even do that bit there. And the forest, the famous forest that they got lost in, that was actually filmed in Patapsco Valley State Park.
Okay.
Oh, right.
Okay, so these facts are. I think you would be quite shocked, actually. I wonder if the residents now do slam doors in people's faces, go, "No, you don't talk about it here, for God's sake."
Oh, not you. Yeah.
They just open the door and go, "Oh no, not again."
But I think it's pretty much, if people don't know that the Blair Witch is, what it was, sort of like a film now, I mean, they'll never know anything, surely.
No. It's a pure urban legend that they put basically a story around and based it in this little town called Burkersville. That's exactly what it was. It wasn't anything to do. It's not based in fact at all. And anyway, it's an urban legend that's been picked up by these guys. And like I say, you could pick this similar story up across many, many places across the world. You know, as I say, you know, most towns have got an urban legend of a spooky house where something bad is supposed to happen. They've picked up that urban legend and dropped it right on Burkesville and, you know, built the story around that in very similar fashion to The Hunchback of Notre Dame.
Yeah.
Using the cathedral as the mainstay of the story and then built up the story around that. But it's a brilliant use of urban legend storytelling. It's absolutely fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good film. I can remember seeing it in Australia, and yeah, it was good.
I mean, in your research, it did make me actually chuckle. There's a bit in it that says Timothy J. Reese, who is the town's unofficial historian. He wrote in 1999 that those claiming to have done their homework in this regard had better direct their gullible inquiries to the buffoons who crafted this fictional cinematic nonsense. We locals would appreciate if they took their fantasies elsewhere.
Well, yeah, they weren't happy.
Doesn't sound like they were happy,
think,
so don't go
I don't
knocking
think
on
they
any
were.
doors there is what I would suggest. But you can't deny what they've done, what Mirek and Sanchez did, particularly with their pre-film documentary.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was
released.
the master stroke.
That was the master stroke of marketing that sold the film.
Yeah.
You wanted to know what happened to those teenagers in that wood. You wanted to see the Blair Witch if they'd possibly caught her on camera. You wanted to see that footage, no matter how badly crafted it was put together. You wanted to see them running around scared in the woods in the middle of the night. Us three, we love a woods in the middle of the night. We admit this. We don't go running around scared. But how many times we pretended, you know, in one of our downtime jest moments to do the Blair Witch iconic Heather moment with the beanie hat, not crying.
Yes.
You know, we've all done that. That's how iconic this film now is.
See, I think that the story sort of almost mimics the success of the Dyatlov Pass, and well, I say success, but the interest in that they thought, well, okay, we could do a similar bit of story here, make it about a town in America. And do you know what I mean? Just sort of, it starts sort of.
It certainly has the overtones. I can certainly see where you're coming from, Paul. And I mean,
so they're almost making money out of the Dyatlov Pass without making money out of the Dyatlov Pass.
Well, yeah, they probably would have looked into the story as well, where you don't know and their sort of process. We've got a sort of basic overview of how they researched and stuff like that. But yeah, they would have probably looked at other paranormal sort of events or strange events. And plus, this was at a time just when the paranormal, I think this film came out at the right time. It was just as the paranormal was starting to take off, wasn't it? You know, sort of like to hit the mainstream. There was a building interest in the paranormal. You know, you would have had the end, you know, the X-Files would have been running and stuff like that. And the very early sort of paranormal TV shows were making their first airings on television. So there was certainly a first for something like this to come along.
And it was completely different from any other horror kind of genre. It, you know, the supernatural genre that comes out. It was so completely different. Before then, you had like the slasher kind of horror movies, didn't you?
Yeah.
You know, whereas this hit psychological
this
level.
Sort of, I mean, this sort of movie did sort of change the way that horrors were, or some of the horrors are thought of, because this one, it wasn't, up until this point, you'd be the outsider watching the story unfold in front of you, where it was almost, because the Blair Witch was filmed on camcorder, it was almost like they were putting you in the story.
Right. On this concept, I want to talk about this concept a little bit more, of being part of that story. We've talked about the explosion in paranormal TV at that time, and that led to an explosion in people wanting to go out and do paranormal investigating for themselves. Now, the lead character of that film, Heather, the curiosity for the story of the Blair Witch, you know, in the film, this is very paramount. She's the driving force in that, isn't she? So you've got this main character that's the driving force, who's been totally captivated by a story, in the same way that a whole plethora of people are captivated by this whole ethos of going out and finding a ghost, you know, paranormal investigating. You know, so we've got a trend that's running side by side here. She encapsulates what we all kind of want. You know, that's our thirst, that's our passion, that's our curiosity, the driving force that makes us want to go to woods in the middle of the night or a dark castle in the middle of the night and, you know, do the investigation side. With the naivety behind that, in the film, that naivety shows it ends badly, basically. Spoiler alert, everybody, if you haven't seen the Blair Witch Project, it doesn't end well. Do you think then that translates into normal? What we do are we actually opening ourselves up blindly because we've got this drive, because we've got this curiosity, because we've got this passion for things that we maybe don't understand?
Interesting.
I think
question.
sometimes to understand something, you have to experience it. We can do all the research that we can, but it only takes you so far before you want to experience it. And I think with a lot of paranormal teams, especially, you know, we all do the research and look into different cases, and you know, we can only get so far. But then we go out and look for these experiences ourselves, and then we learn a little bit more because we actually experienced it. We know the research, we know the theory. Let's put it into practice.
Yeah, because particularly with the Blair Witch, it was sort of like the first time it was offered. Well, the burgeoning sort of TV shows were coming out at the time, but it was the first time where you sort of actually sort of went out to these locations and stuff. Like before then, I mean, back in the day, I mean, paranormal research and investigating was very much a sort of like an academic pursuit. You know, you just done it in libraries and sort of, you know, read books and papers and stuff like that. Very rarely would you actually go out to actually these places and investigate.
You would actually do a study, a research study.
Yeah.
You'd put a call out in the newspaper for people who'd had experiences to come forward. And it was about talking to people about their experiences rather than going searching for the experience.
Yeah, that's right.
That's where the difference lies. So your curiosity is actually being fulfilled by somebody else's story, personal experience.
Yeah.
Whereas all of a sudden, we're shown that you can go out and do that by TV shows. You know, like for me, in the UK, this was Most Haunted was the forerunner in that. It showed that you could go out in the middle of the night with pieces of kit that were available to use. All right.
Yeah.
You know, the validity of those pieces of equipment is now I know more, is brought into question. But at the time, with no knowledge, the thought of you could actually go out and hunt that experience for yourself was something completely different from being able to read books on research or read books on stories or magazines that were out at the time. And, you know, it brought it into your front room.
It did. I mean, I think it had been I think a lot of sort of like people interested in the paranormal before sort of Most Haunted and sort of these sort of things, they often sort of were trying to think of a way of how do we take this sort of further, and then sort of like, you know, Most Haunted come on and sort of like filled the gap, and this is how you can extend your interest. Because as I said earlier, I mean, before it was literally just, as you said, Kerry, collating stories and experience accounts, because generally the paranormal is not something really you could actually go out and experience. They are very fleeting, and you know, and by the time you arrive, I mean, it's usually gone anyway.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, so it is. They were sort of like filling this sort of like need, and when they sort of like, I suppose it was an experiment for Most Haunted to do, you know, just one series perhaps they had in mind, and then it just took off from there.
I think it did. I mean, it birthed a whole new genre in regards to the paranormal. It made
television
it more accessible.
watching, yeah.
Yeah, it made it more accessible to people. People were going out. They were caught up in that, the hype, get caught up in the hype. In very much the same way as the Blair Witch project, you know, the Blair Witch Project. It's very, you get caught up in that project, you get caught up in that genre, you know, you get caught up in the fact that you can go out. I mean, the height, you've got to remember, when Most Haunted were at their height, they were doing lives in locations with an audience, and they were doing things that, looking at it now coldly, that there's absolutely no chance whatsoever of them catching actually any real activity, right? And even if they had, you couldn't. It was all smoke and mirrors.
Yeah, it was all very sort of inconclusive. There was, it was always lurking just round the corner. You'll get a little sort of, but which is sort of paranormal investigating in general. You never sort of get the whole picture, do you? You would only capture a snippet.
But there would be most haunted parties, and you'd be able to watch the live cams as well as watching what was going on the TV. So, and now we get more technology, so we've got a laptop that we're watching the live cams on whilst watching the TV, them doing the show. And it was all, Paul even went to one, didn't you?
Yeah, I did, yeah.
Which one did you go to?
Sorry, go on.
Which one did you go to?
I can't remember.
Wasn't it Dover Castle?
I've been on so many.
No, the Most Haunted.
No, which Most Haunted did you go
the Most Haunted one. It was Tatton Park.
Oh, there you go, Tatton Park. He was in the audience for that.
Yeah, that was horrendous.
Because what you're part of is a TV show.
Yeah, but don't ever ask me to go back. It was an experience at the end of the day.
Yeah. And they didn't get any evidence that night because they had the blocker in the audience.
No. To be fair, the Most Haunted team were off doing their own thing with their cameraman, and I was in the studio, what they set up as a studio in Tatton Old Hall. So I was in the audience where you had, I think it was Paul Ross at the time. He was up on the stage with doing his various bits and pieces, and we just had to clap for England. That's all we was there for. They have like 50 million breaks, and we had to clap out into the break and then back. So yeah.
Because they would run for like 3 hours, it was like it was extended. It wasn't just like an hour that you would see, and they would do a bit of history, a little bit of history. Then they'd have the medium walk around. Then they would be talking about how they felt. It's still a spooky place, and everybody, every place it's got a vibe. It's got a vibe. Everybody, we've already got activity started to happen. I don't know what's going to happen when the lights go out. It builds a hype, and that's what TV is all about. It's about building an audience. It's about building a hype for you, in the same way as the Blair Witch did with the documentary before they released the film. It built that hype. It's pure marketing genius. P.T. Barnum would have had a field day, right?
Oh, yes.
Absolutely.
Yes, sort of, they obviously took a lot of sort of pointers from our Mr. Barnum.
They certainly did. So, when you look at it now, do you think that we've moved on from that? Or do you think people are still actually buying into the original hype? Do you think that they have moved on with their investigations?
Despite how much a lot of people out there sort of say no, they've moved on, they actually haven't, unfortunately. That's my opinion, anyway. I mean, we do see it a lot. I mean, you can dress it up as much as you like, but you don't have to sort of like scratch the veneer too deeply to see that it is just basically the same format. They're taking what they've learned, or not what they've learned. They have taken that TV format, put it out in the real world, so to speak. But, it just hasn't developed at all. It's been very stagnant.
The kit has moved along. There's lots of different types of kit now that people use. Do you think then that people get caught up in the hype of kit and apps and things that are coming onto the market? They see it on the TV. It's the latest bit of kit. We've seen this recently, actually, with the the Stickman thingy, the SLS camera.
Yeah, it's certainly these pieces of kit, they don't seem to come independently from the field outwards. They come from TV to the field, because I really can't think of anyone at the moment who's developed anything that sort of didn't have its roots on a TV show.
But
perhaps on
again,
mistake.
to play devil's advocate, if I wanted to sell a piece of kit that I believed was, informative in regards to maybe picking up an anomaly or, something
Well,
like
yeah.
that, I would tout it to the TV shows because
Oh, yes.
then it gets to the biggest audience and the viewing audience that I want to sell to. So, play devil's advocate on that. If you're marketing a piece of kit, you're not going to get anywhere by going in your front room going, "Hi, everybody, I've got a new piece of kit." You need credibility. And by putting it onto a TV show, it kind of, in a really strange, twisted way, it kind of gives it a credibility.
Oh, yes. I mean, you can, yeah. I mean, it's basic marketing, isn't it? Product placement, you could call it, can't you?
Very much so. So where do we sit then with regards to locations and their marketing? Because stories don't come overnight, do they? Or do they?
I don't know. I think, well, I can only talk from the UK perspective. Not that I've actually been investigating per se in these locations, but I have visited a lot of historic locations, and they all come with their history and their ghost stories. And, there does seem to be an over-reliance here in the UK of teams only wanting to investigate these premier locations. The castles and stuff like that, like Warwick Castle and stuff like that. But for me, sort of like the paranormal does not reside in exclusively to these places. I do wish people would research more locally. Think local, act global, I think is the term. Sort of go out and actually do research and find local stuff to actually research, as opposed to just going off on these sort of like organised big events.
But we do find, though, and I'm playing very big devil's advocate on this, we do find, even going back pre-paranormal explosion, there would have been these ghost stories. It makes the day trip more exciting. It adds an edge to it. So it's just an evolution of the folklore, isn't it, story? It's just an evolution of the folklore story in regards to the genre that we deal with, which is the paranormal. If I'd heard that, I don't know, my local castle is supposed to have a ghost of a white lady, I've been there, and investigated it and that was folklore probably way before the paranormal explosion happened, the TV explosion. These places did have those stories going on. They were, talked about and witnessed, and, right, maybe not in the length of, I'm not saying people are making things up and adding to the hype. I think they were already there. But it's the urban legend, isn't it? It's the folklore. It's the story that's been passed down from person to person.
So what you're actually sort of doing, in a way, is sort of like a term I use a bit, is legend tripping. You're finding a location, you're researching the legend or folklore tale associated, and then you go there to experience the whole package, not just sort of.
See, I also think though that okay, you might have a location somewhere, and it's got a ghost story to it. As an event, you take public there. And over time, because so many teams go and do this location, some teams get stuff and other teams don't. Could they be bringing in their own spirit attachments, or bringing their own spirits, basically, and having the interaction with them? And because they're at that location, they're putting it down to the location, so they're building on top of that legend.
It's interpretation of events, is what you're saying. Yeah,
and because obviously then that story gets passed around, they're building on top of the legend with their own experiences, which really didn't have anything to do with the location in the first place, and that sort of almost builds up more hype to that location.
Yeah,
so then more teams want to go to it and have their experiences, and it just builds and builds and builds.
It could be. Sorry, Richard.
Yeah, it seems that you're relying on the kernel of what people will say is the kernel of truth, which is the legend. But legends and folk tales are not necessarily sort of true. So you're sort of building up on what you assume is a a true story and then building up something around there. So what's possibly manifesting, if there is stuff manifesting through the sheer sort of amount of people actually visiting a place and investigating, is probably not even related to the location at all.
Well, I'm particularly thinking of a location in Yorkshire with a very popular black monk. But, you know, the original case happened way back in the 60s for a very short period of time. And, you know, if you go there now, because it is a popular location that people want to go and visit, and I've had a read through their visitors book, and there's a lot of people that go there and have no experiences whatsoever and just slate the place. But then other people go there and they get so much activity that they're really rating it.
Could it be the connection between the people then?
It could be. I mean, there's lots of theories of what it could be. We're not really going to know the truth unless it's really studied hard. But, you know, maybe these people that are having the experiences are bringing in their own spirits and just having that interaction with them at that location because they're opening themselves up more, thinking they're going to get this black monk, when in actual fact they're getting whatever spirit is around them at the time.
Yeah, I suppose paranormal investigators, when they go out, or groups go out, it's like if you're sort of like a religious person, you're probably more than likely to have a religious experience in church. Whether that church is haunted or not, it's just a building at the end of the day.
It's just by the by, isn't it?
Yeah, and that is by the by. But you're in the sort of like the right setting, and there's people around there. You know, and the other parishioners as well. You know, so that would be the place to have an awakening or a religious sort of experience. And this could be what's going on with sort of castles and manor houses and stuff now, which have these sort of legends attached, that people are going there to get their sort of paranormal experience, their religious experience.
I think I think it's like I've said before. I don't think it's one size fits all. I think you have to look at, you know, expectation. You have to look at, you know, your connection to your team friends, you know, that you're going out with, or the vibe in the, you know, the people that are going. You have to look at your knowledge. You know, is that an effect? Do you know the story really well? We know how when you sometimes research the history of something, it doesn't back up with the legend of the place. It's, you know, there's a very big gap sometimes, and we are very affected, even though we may not realise it, on media.
Yeah.
You know, I do think we have to be very careful of that. And films and media and news reporting, and we're seeing it very prevalent at this moment in time, of how one tiny incy fact is blown out into something that it completely isn't. You know, and we've seen this with paranormal stories like the Enfield haunting, like 30 East Drive, you know, those two big poltergeist cases. You know, when you start looking at When the Lights Go Out was the film for 30 East Drive. The Conjuring was one for the Enfield haunting. I mean, there have been plenty of others, don't get me wrong, but I'm just saying the ones that hit you in the face the most. When you look at those two films, they're in no relation to the real true story of what happened and how it played out. So do you think people are taking too much influence from media in regard to their paranormal experiences?
I think the paranormal still demands the paranormal research, and, you know, we're still very heavily reliant on a location. It's very location based. And if I'll clarify what I said, whereas I would personally want to see more research going into the theory of paranormal, and you know, does this work anywhere? Does this happen anywhere? We still seem to be stuck that you principally do need a location to go to, and this is quite possibly where, you know, sort of like at present the paranormal is sort of like not moving on, because people, you know, are just keen to actually just get out and go out to a location.
But to be fair, playing devil's advocate again, I'm going to flip the coin on that. If you had the chance to go to somebody where you know, right, so say take the Enfield haunting. If you had the opportunity, knowing that the case is done now, that case is done, it finished, it ended while the people were in the house.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you had the chance to go to that location, you would still do it.
Oh yeah. This is the catch-22 about the whole situation.
I think I would like to go there and talk to the current owners just to see whether or not they have experienced anything. But that would be the extent of it. If they turned around and said, no, we haven't had anything, that was it. There's no point hanging around because there's nothing to investigate. And most poltergeist activity and everything sort of dwindles away after about 18 months.
Well, the classic...
So you're only looking at a small period of time again. And this is the issue that I have with the 30 East Drive. Because, again, it's based on a case that happened in the 60s and nothing's been reported since.
But then we go down into classification of types of hauntings, which is actually something we're going to explore more next week. Because there are different types of hauntings. Poltergeists, one of the key points of poltergeists is they're for a short period of time. They seem to burn out very, very quickly.
Yeah.
About
18 months, isn't
tops,
it? About...
Tops.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? It's very flash in the pan kind of experience. It's not an elongated haunting, but there are plenty of other types of hauntings that do have an extended history of hauntings, reoccurring hauntings we're talking about here. Not necessarily on a certain day, but they're seen on a regular basis. We talked about, you went to Castle Rising not so long ago with the lovely Vivian Powell. That's an apparition, and strange happenings occur even to this day. And the caretakers of the place are reporting this on a regular basis. They're not making it up. These are very level-headed, well-researched people. These are generally people that are not actually that into the paranormal, caretakers of the place, guides through some of the castles and stuff like that. You do, just go in there, do their walking around saying this artifact is this, and this was worn by so-and-so. We get a lot of that. But when you start talking to them about maybe strange occurrences that have happened, they've all got a story to tell. They're not lying. They've had an experience they can't explain. We want to experience that. We want that personal experience. So I don't blame teams for wanting to go to a location. And to be fair, some of the locations you can get into under the guise of paranormal investigating, you would kill to go and not have the crowds following around so you can't see the artifacts. You're there in the middle of the night. That's fantastic, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, yeah, I can certainly see the appeal for it.
I would not knock a location. There are certain locations I would love to do, just purely and simply so you get access to a building in the middle of the night when nobody else is around. Certain museums.
It is nice, and some of the buildings do take on a personality of their own.
Yeah.
At night, I've been to plenty of locations. Obviously, I run an events team, as you guys know, and I tend to get to locations before the team and the public. So I get to meet the manager and then have a walk around myself. And I've got the whole museum, castle, whatever it happens to be, all to myself. And even that on its own is just fantastic.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, there's certainly an appeal to that. When you get sort of like these places, it's like I always equate it to, it's like if you go out and stand by a still river, you get that sort of sense, don't you? You always get a feeling, don't you? And when you're on your own, by a still river, it's like having a castle to yourself. That is quite something.
There's no feeling like it in the world.
No.
You can't even tangibly put that feeling on it, and every place has a different feel.
Yeah. And
we're after that experience. But I would say that don't rely on the urban legend or folklore tale. Do your research. Go back, have a look. Look at the historical aspects of it. Is there anything that backs up, once you've done your investigation, what's come out of that investigation? Be critical minded. Look at it.
And always go back.
If it's information that's come out that you, like a name, for example, you can research that. If you're very lucky, you might find something that actually links it.
Well, yeah. And I think of all, sort of going back on what I said, sort of thinking again of people need to be more engaged with, I don't know, what a lot of people will consider the boring stuff. Sort of like the research and the stuff afterwards or beforehand, analysing your sort of data, which not a lot of people do. They use it as a guise and say they do, but they don't.
But this is why we've got you on the team, Richard.
Oh, right. I see.
I have great admiration for the person on the team that trawls through hours and hours and hours of footage and audio and experiments and, all that stuff that we do on investigations. We record it, we're diligently recording it. When we do EVP sessions or lone vigils, we're recording it on our voice recorders. We might miss something on the night, so we're looking at video footage and audio footage afterwards. And there's a person on every team that is generally the main person to sit there and view hours and hours of footage that's recorded, because generally it isn't just one camera, it isn't just one voice recorder, it's like 2 or 3 or a whole CCTV.
Well, that's it. I mean, if you've got like CCTV that most people put out, what you've got, like 4, 8 cameras, and if you're doing a recording for 5 hours investigation, that's 5 times 8 you've got, and it's a hell of a lot of hours, isn't it? Really?
Yeah, it is. And so I hold admiration out for anybody that sits through that, considering 99.9% of the time, what are you capturing?
Nothing.
Nothing. Absolutely nothing. And you've spent a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of money, usually, as well, to go and do an investigation. There is passion there. There is commitment there. There is curiosity there. There is a thirst for knowledge. There's so many things that come into it. And we have to be very careful that we don't buy into the folklore, the urban myth, and take it that that's what happened. A lot of people did that with Blair Witch. They went to Burkesville and people got very cross with them when they turned up. And the history that was put out there wasn't correct. It wasn't.
No.
It's very much like Borley. There's a lot of myth and urban legends around Borley as well, and paranormal investigators go there quite a lot, and the local people, they don't like it.
No.
Very small
village,
and the church, which is the main sort of like attraction of the place now, is you've got houses literally right next to it, so you can see their point. They don't want people wandering about their back gardens, which technically it is, in the middle of the night.
No, exactly. They're well within their rights to keep complaining about it, because people do keep going back there.
Time and time again.
Yeah.
Yep.
And, we hear this so much, even in the ufology world, an experience will happen in a certain area. I'm thinking Rendlesham in Point. There is a whole quagmire of crap that surrounds that particular story. But, when we went in the middle of the night, because you've got to be done in the middle of the night, right?
Oh, of course it is.
Of course. We went there. We weren't expected to see anything. We weren't expecting to see little green men with their little flying saucers. But just to experience it and to be there at the sort of, in the middle of the night. And there was loads of people out and about.
There was, wasn't there? And it was a very strange atmosphere as well anyway. It was really weird.
It did have a strange feel to it, in a way that, we've been to several different places in the middle of the night, not necessarily haunted, for different reasons, for, varying reasons as to why we've gone to have a look around, very respectfully, obviously, because we're very respectful for our local residences in these places. Yeah. But there is nothing like exploring somewhere or someplace in the middle of the night.
It's definitely got to be done.
But I'm not going to criticise anybody for doing it in the night. You get just as many paranormal experiences happening during the day too. We've talked about this before. You don't have to do it at night. They're going to, there's no rhyme or reason to them. They happen when they are. If you want to increase your chances, then you try and do it because there's less people around, less EMF being floating around, like roaming EMF. It's less contamination from other people. There's loads of different reasons why we like to do it in the middle of the night. But God, it's a good atmosphere.
I think a lot of people tend to report paranormal activities happening of a night because they're out of the home during the day doing work and normal life stuff. And, they're not home to experience it. But when they get home, they sit down in front of the telly and they're in for the night. And that's when they're going to experience the activity. So I think that's why a lot of teams do stuff at night. When I do private investigations, I like to get a diary, a 2-week diary, before I even go in, just to see whether there is a pattern, see if anything does happen during the day, if they are there during the day, and things like that. So, I think that's why a majority of teams do tend to go in at night.
And also, they can make money during the day by tourism. You're not going to... they can keep their doors open, take money in the night, and then it's added revenue for locations if they can then hire it out of an evening as well for a team. That's added revenue.
Absolutely, and I've got, I don't begrudge any venues charging for locations, but I just think some locations charge so much money as it is extortion.
But be careful, be discerning, and if you're going to go to a location, check your story. Is it just an urban myth that someone's made up so they can sell their location, or is there any basis in fact? We've demonstrated how folklore and urban legend gets taken through and spoken about, and, has not changed particularly through history or has grown and evolved through history. We've demonstrated that with some well-known stories tonight, and even shown you a true case of fact of the Blair Witch Project. That was a pure urban legend myth that can be found in majority of towns, that 2 guys took as a really good story and placed it on a particular town. Be careful. Is it just an urban legend that's been adopted for the story? Or is it a point in fact of a real story for that place? That is what you have to be very discerning about. We've seen it. We've seen history be written through films like the Amityville Haunting, the Conjuring. These stories are being rewritten in regards to historical events. We've seen that. Gosh, even World War II events have been rewritten for Hollywood.
Yeah, even just basic and history stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. And we've shown you also how a good old folk story that was actually quite dark and a bit not so nice has been sanitised to be put out there for the public domain. So you do have to be very discerning and do a lot of background research, don't you guys?
Yeah,
definitely.
Tell us about it. Yeah,
research is the key.
It is, and even research. Be careful what you find on the internet, because it's not always true. On that note, I would just like to say we've demonstrated this in a very light-hearted way. We've talked about it in regards to the paranormal. We've talked about, films, how they've changed history or made history for a certain place. We've shown how folklore stories have got changed and sanitised through it. This is happening on a global scale at this moment in time. Bits of information are being put together and 2 and 2 are making 5. Be discerning with the information that you are taking in and do your research and look into the background before you believe every conspiracy theory that's out there at the moment. Right, guys?
Yeah.
Well, there's 1 or 2 out there, so yeah.
1 or 2? My God.
1 or 2? On the internet? Never.
No, surely not. Anyway, on that note, I'd like to say, take care, stay safe, stay in. Don't go out. Don't go out investigating, for God's sakes, not at the moment. Spend this time wisely, do some research. On that note, we've actually come to the end of the show. Say good night, guys.
Good night, guys.
Guys.
Good night.